Hugh Hefner, founder of Playboy, dead at the age of 91. There are many people who regard Hugh as a great man, the ultimate player, the personification of every teenage boy's fantasy about what he thinks it means to be a man. Super rich, famous, worshipped by the public, able to get any girl he wants. There are even others who regard him as a type of hero, a champion of the so-called sexual revolution, who helped to liberate sex from the outdated and archaic boundaries imposed on it by Judeo-Christian tradition. Even so, there are many who have come to realize that the true legacy of the pamphleteer of pornography is one that is paved with tears, broken marriages, destroyed lives, child abuse, and shattered hearts. So which legacy should we take as true? Famed cultural hero, or the porn pusher who poisoned minds with one of the worst forms of addiction ever known to man? If anyone has yet to find an answer to that question, the following clips should help them tremendously with coming to a conclusion. Disclaimer: this video is not a judgment on Hugh as a human being. I don't sit in a position high enough to do that. What it is an inspection of fruit, a plain statement describing the produce that grew from a person's life, the power behind it, and the effect that it has had on the world for the last 60 plus years.
Mass media seems to have always been on the side of Kinsey and his philosophy. A philosophy carried out by Hugh Hefner in 1953 when he launched Playboy magazine. That same year, Kinsey released his K-Bomb, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, the second book in his report on human sexuality. Hefner made an immediate association between his soft porn magazine and Kinsey's research.
I referred to it in the first introduction to the first issue and called it the other great book that was coming out in 1953. Max Lerner, the historian and a good friend of mine, said that Kinsey was the researcher and I was the pamphleteer. And it's an interesting way of looking at it. I certainly do think that in a very real way, the sexual revolution began in 1953, with the second book and the beginning of Playboy.
Hugh Hefner had been under the influence of Kinseyan philosophy since the release of the male volume in 1948. He had even written about it in a college publication years before he started Playboy magazine. Half a century later, in Playboy's 50th anniversary issue, Hefner paid special tribute to Alfred Kinsey, celebrating the man who had helped him launch the sexual revolution. But Playboy represented more than just nude photos of the girl next door. According to Hefner, the magazine was, quote, a statement of rebellion without question. The first official Playboy playmate was named Janet Pilgrim, directly intended to mock America's Puritan heritage. In time, Hefner would publish the Playboy philosophy, a new morality for the post-Kinsey era. Just as Kinsey had gone all over the country, preaching the message of sexual reform, Hefner followed his example, giving speeches, appearing on talk shows, and speaking in public forums as the pamphleteer for Kinsey's sexual revolution.
So what you're saying, Mr. Hefner, is that we should encourage premarital sexual relations?
I think that we should encourage the notion that sex can be right and proper in marriage or out of marriage.
In time, Hefner set up the Playboy Foundation, which became, quote, one of the major sources of income for the Kinsey Institute. But was Hefner's sexual revolution simply about giving consenting adults the right to alternative lifestyles? Or was there a hidden agenda within the pages of Playboy, one that would further the child sexual abuse also found in the Kinsey reports? In 1983, Dr. Judith Reisman was appointed by the Juvenile Division of the Department of Justice to investigate the images in Playboy, along with Penthouse and Hustler magazines. In her Department of Justice study, Dr. Reisman revealed that from 1953 to 1982, Playboy and eventually Penthouse and Hustler magazines had published approximately 9,000 images of children involved in sexual scenarios, an average of about 8 to 9 images per issue.
He has no idea that the messages that are being pumped into him, neurophysiologically, if you will, all the way down and through his system, include images of sexual assault of children. And he, as the viewer, becomes the predator. That's just the way the human brain works.
The following are images from Dr. Reisman's presentation at the FBI Training Center in Quantico. Please understand, the most severe images we are unable to show you. Dr. Reisman demonstrates how the cartoon imagery of children progressed into real-life images, either of children or of legal-aged women who were made to look like obviously underage girls. Over time, the scenarios suggested greater degrees of sexual aggression and violence, including murder. During World War II, the Nazis used cartoons to condition the minds of Germans against the Jewish people, creating an exaggerated and comical identity that ultimately led to their persecution and mass murder. Dr. Reisman believes a similar kind of conditioning has happened through the use of cartoon imagery that depict the rape and abuse of children.
Children are being sexually assaulted, they're being trampled on, they're being kidnapped, they're being murdered. And I have all of those kinds of cartoons.
Some of the following cartoons are disturbing, such as this image from Playboy of an infant child masturbating, with a title that reads, "Getting Off." Not surprisingly, the cartoon supports the Kinseyan view that children are sexual from birth.
This video clip has highlighted the sheer evil of the spirit at work behind Playboy. The so-called sexual revolution it embodied, the man it empowered, and the philosophy that gave it wings. Remember, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood alone. The principalities and rulers of darkness seek bodies to operate through in order to access the four-dimensional reality that we experience in our physical form. They will use whatever and whoever provides them an open door and a willing vessel. When Hugh became a prophet of perversion, they found such a vessel. Don't forget, he said specifically that his work was an act of rebellion. But rebellion against who exactly? And rebellion for which cause? It's pretty clear in this case, I think. Kinsey, a monster of a man who made profit from child sexual abuse and turned it into a pseudoscience, provided the words, but Hef gave it a voice and a face. The intent of that voice was clearly to make war with the moral lawgiver of the universe, the creator of heaven and earth, the God of the Bible. Hugh's self-proclaimed rebellion was against God himself and the Judeo-Christian values that overflowed from worship of the true and living God. Now, I wonder where he got that idea from. Well, make no mistake about it. The sexually perverse atmosphere of our society today has been methodically planned and ruthlessly orchestrated. The moral relativism and confusion of our time would not have been possible without the cultural corruption of the 50s and 60s, which in turn was the outworking of the philosophies and occultism that came before it, going all the way back to the very first rebel. Yes, Hugh played a key role in that rebel's plan, a plan to set the spiritual stage and moral temperature for Lucifer's rising. The man of perdition who prepares to make his debut. Thankfully, though, we already know how this one is going to end. Hugh once said that he enjoyed a good life from all the gain he received over the decades of the spiritual rot that he inspired. That life may belong to us, but a brief vapor through the perspective of eternity is now over. The damage has been done. I hope it was all worth it. I love you all. God bless you. Peace.